Good evening. My name is Kimberly K. Pineda, and I'm currently on my second year at the University of the Philippines Open University under the program of Bachelor of Arts in Multimedia Studies. So before I start with the media presentation or this video, I'd like to do a quick disclaimer and immediately apologize for any awkwardness or any prospective dead airs that may arise during the term or during the duration of this video. First and foremost, I find that I'm intensely camera shy, so me having to talk to the video for a certain period of time is incredibly intimidating, and as well as the topic that I'm about to discuss today or at this moment is incredibly sensitive, not just to me personally speaking, but I feel that it is a topic that is incredibly sensitive to majority of our population, to our majority of our society. I guess just to disclose the reason why I find this topic quite a bit sensitive is that I would say that I'm pretty much on the feminist side, and I tend to get a little bit defensive when it comes to discussing my views and how I look at certain things to people, and I feel that I tend to get defensive on that aspect. And another thing is that because we're discussing gender gap not just as the feminism aspect, but we're discussing gender gap inclusive of the LGBTQ community. Well, I will be discussing that, and I also am quite defensive of the LGBTQ plus community due to the fact that my youngest sister is actually transgender, and I'm very much fully in support of that particular community. Now, having said that, I would definitely put this out in the open that everyone has the right to their own opinions and their own beliefs and their own worldviews, and that everything here is specifically just my own point of view and how I look at things, and how I certainly define things and my beliefs on specific topics and specific issues that have arise or that are currently being tackled in this day and age. So I like to proceed with the presentation now. The topic that I'd like to discuss is the concept of gender and multimedia in the Filipino settings. Now, before I can discuss that concept, I'd like to first start by identifying gender equality or gender inequality and when and where it started, or basically answering the questions of when, how, why, and where, prospectively. So I'd like to do a quick history overview, basically, of when it prospectively started, how, why, etc., etc. So from as early as humans can document, there has been a certain gender norm distinction that was instilled to us from generations to generations, and that is what we currently have right now, which is the male and the female. And this is actually highly based on biology and as well as religion. Predominantly, I would say a combination of both. And particularly, I would say that this is highly based from culture as well. Now, as the Filipino community, our culture is actually highly influenced by our colonialization. And in this particular instance, since we're talking about biology and religion together, I would say that the majority of our influence comes from Spain and their colonialization of us for about 300 to 350 years. The Spaniards actually brought us the religion Catholicism and Christianism, and that is why around majority of our population, I would say 90 to 92% of our population, based on the statistics that I did research on, and was currently just released this year. I would say the first to the second quarter of this year, 90 to 92% of our population is under those two said religion. And this particular history comes to play when it comes to us as a community, in trying to close the gender gap that we currently have. Now, before I continue, I want to put a definition on what gender gap means. So, again, I'll put in a little bit of a history on how gender gap as a term was coined. So initially, this term was actually used to describe the unequal treatment between the female and the female gender and the male gender. Notice that I actually mentioned it the other way around, mentioning first the female rather than the natural order that people would dictate it, which is the male first before the female. Just from this arrangement, you can already see, or you can already get a vibe of what the term basically means. The norm before was that the female gender is actually considered just secondary or inferior to the male sex. But when in consideration in multiple aspects, but a prime example is reproductively speaking, females generally tend to carry more of the burden. And I'm not just talking about that in a literal sense when it comes to carrying, a fetus inside of you for say 9 months and experiencing all the symptoms and possibly going through such trauma in your body when giving birth. And not only that, but it's continuous work, raising a child, providing a child, nurturing, not only nurturing a child within your body or inside your body, but nurturing a child to make sure that that child would grow up to be an appropriate human being. Therefore, the movement to address this and the rights of women and female was actually developed, and this is what you call feminism, or this is where feminism, which is the advocacy or the movement of women's rights, were developed, and why numerous feminist movements have been done to counter the inequality of the gender female and as well as male. Now, the first movement actually started around the 19th century. I would give an estimate, a rough estimate, I would say around the 1930 to up until 1945 was the first movement that was initially addressing the rights for women to have a say politically speaking, or to be precise, to vote. The first movement was initially addressing that particular issue. Now, numerous continuous movements have been brought to attention, and all of these are addressing other aspects of inequality, or other issues of inequality, like addressing legal rights of women, property rights, and even reproductive rights, which at that time, and I would say even up to this time, reproductive rights of women is still considered taboo due to the fact that we are, again, majority of our population is based on the Catholicism and Christianism religion. And therefore, this particular instance causes a gap, basically, or a clash between the two concepts of religion and the Word of God, or the Word of the Bible, versus the medical needs or science. So I would say that those two topics, science and religion, has always been mortal enemies, and I honestly don't see how the two of those can find a compromise in between. But going back to the topic, basically feminism or gender gap in its simplistic terms is addressing the differences in between the two genders. But now, in this day and age, gender gap is used not only to address the difference between female and male, which is what we call the typical gender, but it now also includes addressing the needs of people that belong within the intersex community, or the LGBTQ plus category. Now, LGBTQ plus stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. The plus sign is a symbol that is used to encompass specific spectrums or other spectrums of sexuality and gender that may not be aligned within the lesbian or the gay or the bisexual or the transgender. So now, when we're talking about gender inequality or the gender gap, we're not just talking about the traditional or the typical gender, which is the female and the male. We're now inclusive of the intersex and as well as the LGBTQ plus community, and addressing the differences when it comes to multiple factors, politically speaking, religiously speaking, human rights, etc., etc. So back to the present now, after a brief history lesson for us to gain an understanding about these complex terms and how and why they exist, I feel that this topic that we are tackling right now, which is the gender gap inequality, is highly relevant in this day and age. And I will admit that the treatment of the female sex has gotten better over time, not only the female treatments, but as well as the LGBTQ community. Therefore, we have people now in numerous sectors fighting for the soggy bill to get approved, and fighting for, the reproductive health bill to get approved as well, or to get more rights, legal rights, physical rights, medical rights, not only for the female gender, but as well as for that other sectors as well. But I would definitely say that we definitely have more to go. We have a lot more issues that needs to be tackled and that needs to be addressed, and that needs specific and proper resolution. So, I mean, comparing to a certain period of time where, if we're talking about just feminism, in a personal level or in a physical level, I would definitely say that the treatment of females have definitely gotten better compared to from a certain period in time where females were considered as breeding mares. I would say was around the 17th, 18th century, specifically breeding mares for heirs to the throne, maybe specifically to sons in particular, where sons have greater value compared to daughters, or to where females or women are considered kitchen properties, and that should only be at home, stay at home moms, etc., etc., or possibly both, which is what's currently happening right now to us. So again, going back, there are still some stigmas that are left that needs to be addressed and that needs to be resolved. Like, a certain few examples that I could open up is that how a man, if goes through multiple experiences when it comes to relationships, is actually considered manly, whereas if a woman went through or goes through numerous phases of relationship, is actually considered as a scarlet woman, or for lack of a better term, a slut or a whore. So just from that difference, you can definitely still say that there is still huge gap when it comes to that, or when it comes to that particular aspect. And or if a woman is a single mom, you hear the term buy one take one, and honestly speaking, I'm also a single mom, and I actually get that term a lot. Or you get the assumption of men thinking that mm, women who are single moms tend to be harder to date due to the fact that you'd end up having to provide the responsibility for the child as well, or you're having to provide for the child as well. But when you date a man who is a single father, the only thing you hear is, oh, what a dedicated guy, or what a dedicated father, or he's gonna be a good father someday, or anything that is on the positive note. Whereas on a woman's perspective, if you see a woman going through numerous relationships, or possibly being a single mother that is left, or that was left by the partner, the father of the child, neglected, etc., what you get is a negative note, or a negative term, or a negative description. So, um, again, I can go on and on about numerous issues that we can discuss when it comes to the inequality of treatment versus women to men. A lot of these have different branches and different, I would say, aspects and components that we can tackle. I mean, there is domestic abuse, there is political inequality, there is economical inequality, there is social inequality, there are stigmas. But I guess in particular, what I want to focus on is the inequality that we have when it comes to careers, particularly females within the information and technology sector. So, and I definitely say that I actually have an experience with this, and I would definitely mention this along the way within this proposal, or um, within this discussion or discourse. So, just a quick insight when it comes to the difference between male, female within, again, the information or the IT sector, or the communication and technology sector. Statistically speaking, within, again, the information and technology, they have a tendency to have a higher population of males compared to females. And there's actually a term that is coined within this sector, which is what you call it's man's world, is what they say. So there's always been a stigma that a line of work like this, that involves mathematics, that involves technology, that involves engineering, or any aspect of business, numbers, bookkeeping, um, is and has still been considered a man's world. So they find that women are not suitable for work or employment like this, because usually women are deemed soft, fragile. They have a tendency to be more sensitive. They have a tendency to be more, more, um, more lacking when it comes to strength and intellectual abilities, is what they say. So I'm going to put a quotation mark on that. But there's also a stigma where recruiters have a tendency to pick male candidates over females, because they feel that men can handle the job better compared to women. And I guess another predominant issue here that I'd like to discuss is the vast difference when it comes to compensation of female candidates applying for the same position versus the male candidates. So there was this one particular study that I saw and read about, and it was aired in one of our biggest media networks, which is ABS-CBN. It was released around September 2019, and it was a study that was conducted in partnership with JobStreet Philippines. So JobStreet Philippines is one of, if not, I dare say, the leading employment marketplace in the Philippines, and I would even go as far as to say the whole of Asia, or possibly the APAC region. So from that from that particular article, they did say, or it was undisclosed and it was anonymous, but people within the job street community, they did disclose that in the college graduate positions on both genders, there really is no gap when it comes to compensation. They say that the gap actually starts to broaden going up to the postgraduate and supervisory levels. So they actually also supplemented this claim by saying that the bigger the companies are, or the more prestigious the companies are, the more that they have men on the top management position level. So just from this particular article, you can be able to identify the huge or the vast difference between the unequal treatment between the female gender within this community or within this vertical versus the male gender. They feel that the majority of the reason, or the very predominant reason as to why males are still considerable candidates towards position within this vertical, is because that men, they say, have a higher economical stability compared to women, and even to people that are below the LGBT plus community. So this is still an ongoing issue for us when it comes to this particular market, but I would definitely say that we've come a long way. I can see more powerful women being involved more on certain industries within this sector and in definitely high level positions. I guess a few examples I'd like to share is an idol of mine, which is known as Parisa Tabli. She's actually the director of engineering in Google and the head of high level security. So just from that example, you can see that the capabilities of the female sex versus the male sex is not because of gender, when in reality, and that the basis of recruitment should never be based on gender. It should always be based on the capability of the person or the candidate and the prospect of what that candidate can deliver or contribute to a certain industry or to a certain business or to a certain company, and that should always be the main basis. And the trouble is that we need to be able to address that stigma that we currently have before we can be able to close a certain aspect of the gender gap, or before we can at least be able to close the gap between compensation versus male versus female. I guess personal experience is that I too have experienced being dejected by certain companies that I've applied with due to the fact that they've decided to go towards a male applicant that has more experience, prospectively more talent, just because he is a male, and just because I am a female, and just because they feel that a male would be able to provide or would be able to deliver better work compared to a female. And I guess a resolution in this is definitely proving them wrong, proving specific or basically debunking specific set standards that we have. So the stigma not only arises from employment, but it also arises from communities as well, and from people's perception. So if we can only change perceptions of people, that again, capacity and capability is not based on gender, it's not based on culture, it's not based on religion, it's not based on physical appearance, ethnicity, etc., etc. If we can only remove that stigma and focus on the capability and what that person can be able to contribute to a certain industry, I feel that we'd be able to move forward and close certain aspects of the gender gap and address certain issues within the gender gap. And I would just say that we're definitely getting there and that we're definitely getting more progress. A lot of a lot of females are within the political industry, within the business industry, within the information and technology industries. We're seeing more females that are scientists, that are involved within NASA prospectively, or mathematicians, or actors, or theorists, or even writers and journalists, and even joining the military and even the police force here in the Philippines. We're seeing more of that, definitely, and that's incredible progress, I would definitely say. But I feel that the tendency with people is that we tend to get stagnant. If we keep quiet, or if we keep content on certain issues or certain stature, I feel that we develop a certain sense of stagnancy in us. So say for example, we have the Soggy Bill out, which addresses certain needs of the LGBTQ plus community, like public protection, discrimination, bullying, and then we have a few laws like the Magna Carta for Women that addresses certain issues within the female sector, like legal rights, or legal rights, or a way to be able to fight domestic abuse, or when you're a single mom, you have a right to compensation when it comes to your child, or when it comes to the child of both parties. So we definitely have those in place, but the thing is, we have to keep the awareness open, and we have to always keep the awareness open, and just continuously keep fighting for every single rights, because it's just basic human rights in reality. And there would not be any policies created that would definitely step on other people's or other sectors' rights, so the worry is just that when people tend to get stagnant, they tend to forget, and they tend to again go back to their close-minded mindset, or just people sticking to those that are only relevant or specific to their worldviews, and not being open about certain issues or certain topics that needs more attention. Like, again, going back to the gender gap within female, male, and also as well as the intersex and the LGBTQ plus community. Media has a definite big impact on this. And the worry that I have is that huge media tech companies are developing specific interfaces and algorithms that would tailor fit what you see online based on what you want only, or based on your behaviors only. And that's definitely good. I would say that's definitely good, because you only see what you want to see. But the thing is that you only see what is relevant to what you want, but it decreases, and then the longer it takes, it eliminates it from showing you specific topics that really needs attention, like the Syrian war, the ongoing Syrian war, or the fight between the Jews, or specific certain issues like domestic violence within our OFW community, or how media and news have a tendency to create a bubble that wraps around certain individual, where it creates a veil that would develop a close-minded attitude when it comes to these topics or when it comes to these issues. So just like what I would always say, media, multimedia, online, digital marketing, etc., anything within the Web 2.0, I honestly believe in the use of caution. Being involved in algorithms and interfaces and online marketing and releasing of content, etc., I really always have believed in using everything with caution, particularly multimedia, because this really is impactful. This creates huge impact, a domino effect, whereas you would only say this to one people, but it has the ability to actually reach worldwide, billions of people, millions, thousands of people, different races, different cultures. So you really have to be careful on what you say and what you put out on the internet in certain topics like this, because again, this creates an impact. It creates an echo, a voice that could either improve or resolve certain issues, but then again, it could actually impact certain issues in a negative way as well. It could make it worse. It could hurt people. It could not only emotionally but physically speaking as well, and how truths can be twisted in certain aspects. So again, the use of caution when it comes to multimedia and when it comes to certain sensitive issues like this is definitely something that should be considered. I feel that education and proper communication of how media works and how it can impact people or communities and societies and our future generation would create an impact in improving certain issues like this, because miscommunication is a prime example, or is a prime component of how certain topics and issues can be miscommunicated and misunderstood. Like how a specific article would say trans woman or transgender joins woman athlete, the death of women's sports. So that article or that headline is actually incredibly misleading, because a transgender woman joining a women's athlete does not necessarily mean it's the death of women's athlete or women's sport. Transgender women are misunderstood because, and they tend to be isolated as well within the women community. But in retrospect, in reality, all they want and all they're looking for is the involvement. So again, from there you can be able to understand how media, multimedia, the internet, social media, or anything involved within the internet and the World Wide Web can be misunderstood if the intention is to be misunderstood. So it all again depends on caution and intention, I would definitely say. So if your intent is to harm people, then definitely the intention and the messaging and the way it will be communicated is to harm people. But if your intention is to raise awareness to certain topics and to educate people and to provide awareness or to provide attention to certain issues or aspects that needs attention, then of course the messaging and how that particular asset or component would be communicated is of course in a negative light, in an educating way, in a positive way. So I feel that is what is lacking, and that is how multimedia can impact these certain issues, not just feminism, but also the LGBTQ community, or basically the gender gap as a whole. I feel that feminism in a way has been misunderstood greatly. Feminism is an awareness. It's a way to raise awareness of women's capabilities and women's rights, basically, you know. But it does not give you, or being a feminist does not give you the license to hurt people within other gender sectors, and it doesn't give you the license to basically belittle or discredit the capabilities of the male sector or the male gender or even the LGBT Q plus community. So I feel that there's miscommunication on that aspect as well. So, and media definitely in the near future would impact this either positively or negatively. It really just depends on the intention of what we want to put out there and how it's communicated. So I would say communicate with positive intent and with caution would be the best approach in media impacting these certain issues or addressing these certain issues. Would create a ripple effect or domino effect that could help us in the long run, and that could help our future generations that are within the sectors as well, or that could possibly experience these issues. So I would say that that's really all that I would like to say with regards to this issue. Again, I would really apologize for the awkwardness. I feel that I'm really not prolific enough when it comes to explaining certain issues like this. A tendency with me is that I have a very aggressive way of explaining issues and certain things, and I have also a tendency to go a little bit roundabout on my answer, but I feel that my message has been communicated, at least, or the content that I want to communicate, or the content that I want to show is at least communicated towards this message. But yeah, again, apologies on the awkwardness and as well as the casualness of the video. I feel I have no capacity when it comes to explaining it in a more literate and in a more prolific way, and I really apologize for that. That's something that's been lacking on my part, and that's something that I'm definitely trying to work on through numerous communication courses, and literacy in communication as well. So I would like to thank you for your time and at least listening to my explanation and listening to the topic that I wanted to discuss this evening. And I wish you everyone a wonderful evening ahead. So thank you and have a good night.